What's up, everyone? Today I'm going to be discussing easy opening knives, specifically slip joint knives. In front of me, I have three knives that I've modified with easy open notches. On the left, I have a GEC bullnose, I believe, which is the smaller sodbuster that they make. In the middle, I have a Jim Dunlop Shadow Trapper that I purchased from a knife show, not directly from Jim himself. So I believe the model is called the Shadow Trapper. And on the right, I have a Northwoods Indian River Jack from Knife Ship Free. This particular model was from 2015 and was actually made by Queen using 154 cm instead of 1095. So for many years, I've been carrying slip joint knives as my kind of primary EDC knife, unless I need some kind of folder, one hand opening locking folder for work or whatever other reasons. I like slip joints just because they tend to have better cutting performance, in my opinion. Blade stock tends to be thinner, edges behind the edge, thickness behind the edges tend to also be thinner, which leads to better slicing performance. But in modern times, and I guess actually even in older times, there's this kind of obsession with how strong your spring back is on your slip joints. People call it, I believe it's like the walk portion of the walk and talk, whereas like the talk portion is, the blade kind of snapping back closed. This knife actually was the first knife that got me to wanting to easy open my knives. I'm not going to really go over and show you how I did the modifications on these. Just quickly, very simple. Just use a rotary tool like a Dremel with a sanding wheel. I have like a 10-speed Dremel here, and this was the wheel that I happened to use for the Shadow Trapper. And I just kind of set it to the max speed and very carefully grind out these half circles. And then I would then take finer sandpaper or micro mesh and kind of go in with either some kind of like a Sharpie or even just kind of wrapping sandpaper around my finger and just kind of smoothing everything out and polishing, not to a super high polish or anything, but enough where I'm not feeling any roughness when I'm handling these knives. Instead of showing you easy opening a knife, what I actually wanted to discuss was considerations when you're easy opening a knife. This is actually the progression of the work that I've done. I'm not sure why I didn't put them in this order to begin with. The Northwoods was what inspired me to want to easy open some of my knives. This GEC was basically for practice, and this is one that I've done in the past week or so. I've had this knife actually for a couple of years, and because of how difficult it can sometimes be to open the knife with like the nail nick, I just never actually carried it all that much, even though it's a really nice slip joint knife. So with the Northwoods, you can see here, because this was my first attempt, maybe not the best job in the world. Definitely not in terms of kind of how much material I've removed from the handles, as well as maybe the placement. I think there are three important things when you're talking about where you want to place this half circle. First thing is the comfort of how you're going to grip the knife in your hands after you've basically, sanded out part of the smooth handle. Second part is how easy it is to actually get the blades open. I think the primary reason why knives have easy opens on them is, as the name implies, it's to make them opening a lot, to open these a lot easier. And thirdly, I think of as aesthetics. Clearly, aesthetics was not really what I had thought of here on the first one I did. Second one, this was more about kind of finger placement. Sodbusters in general tend to have quite a bit of blade that stick out from the handle, and you can always just pinch. You don't even have to necessarily use the nail nick to get these open. But like I said, I had this knife. I figured, hey, I kind of want something where I can easily get the blade out with both hands ambidextrously. These knives, slip joints, tend to only have nail nicks on, one side. So if you're a lefty, you tend to kind of open it this way. Oof. Or, go with your right hand and open it this way. I mean, so as you can see here, this is probably the slip joint I have that has the stiffest lock. I have no problems opening this with the nail nick. It's a nice long pull here. But over time, you know, especially with my left hand, as you can see when I did it before, I'm not as strong with my left thumb as I am with my right thumb. And so it can be difficult, you know, if this hand is occupied, like let's say it's slick with something like, you know, oil or whatever, I can generally hold on to the handle pretty well, but holding onto the blade and getting it open is not as easy. Yeah. So you can see here, in terms of placements, I generally have them spaced where the hole will be where my ring finger sits. This is something that I did very intentionally. Holding it in the hands when I'm gripping it, I don't want the hole kind of in between fingers because I think that that tends to kind of lead to hot spots where these points can stick into the flesh of your fingers. But if you kind of have it where where your finger rests into it, when you're gripping this knife really tight in your hands, the hot spots aren't nearly as bad. Part of the reason why I'm not particularly happy with this whole placement is I felt like really I wanted it more towards the middle because of how this blade is. There's a false edge here, a swedge, and when you're gripping onto this portion of the blade, because the material is so much thinner, it is harder to get a grip on. Ideally, once you get to the thicker portion of the spine here, you have a lot more material to kind of pinch up against and get a really firm grip to get the knife opened. But because of this false edge here with the swedge, I had to kind of move this hole kind of further up. But I didn't want it, like I said, I wanted it to rest where my ring finger is. And I also didn't want it too far up because I think aesthetically that wouldn't look all that appealing. Just based off of physics, you know, if you're considering the blade as your leverage arm, obviously the longer the lever arm, the less work you have to do to get the knife open. That's kind of what I was experimenting with the GEC. You know, if I have it here, like yes, this actually doesn't have that stiff of back spring, but pinching it here where the nail nick is does take a lot more effort than pinching it here towards the very tip of the blade where I have a much longer lever arm going to the pivot. With this placement, it actually worked out to be where my pinky is. I don't have particularly large hands. I tend to wear small to medium gloves because my hands are not too slender, but I have pretty short fingers, so longer gloves tend to have a lot of excess material fold over. So with this one, you know, this was pure function. This was all about ease of blade use, ease of blade access, as well as some hand comfort, but not maybe the most thought out position. This one was experimenting more just on comfort, you know, just with the pinky, probably I'm not going to be gripping as hard when I'm, you know, gripping the knife like this. And one nice benefit of this is that with the shape of the handle, the way it swoops upwards, before I easy open this, I would feel kind of a hot spot where the pinky is because it's essentially, my pinky is resting a lot higher than the rest of my fingers in its grip. With the easy opening hole, actually, now the pinky ends up becoming pretty straight with the rest of the fingers, which I think makes it a little more comfortable when you're gripping it tight and doing some hard cutting. The Shadow Trapper, I think is kind of the best of all three worlds. Obviously, experience tends to lead to improvements. So with the Shadow Trapper, I do have a false edge on top. There is a swedge here, but it's not nearly as pronounced as on the Indian River Jack. You can see here that the blade stock thins out quite a bit towards the tip of the knife, whereas on the Shadow Trapper, the blade stock is still relatively the same, even with the very, very minor swedge ground into the blade. This happens to also be the most expensive of the three knives, so that's why I was kind of hesitant about modding this knife. I actually have another slip joint, a Lanny clip from Esnix Knives that, you know, definitely my most expensive slip joint that has a very stiff back spring, and I have been considering easy opening it myself. I spent a good amount of money on that knife. I would like to get some use out of it, but I just haven't worked up the courage to modify something so expensive. But here, in terms of the differences, you can see that the hole size that I've made as I've gone along, I've realized that I just don't need as much of a hole. I don't need as much space for my fingers to get a grip. I actually probably could have made the easy open like here, this much, where I probably have the whole depth at half of what it is now, and I can still pinch the blade out here. Obviously getting this whole surface makes it a lot easier. The Shadow Trapper doesn't have nearly as stiff of a back spring. I can very easily just nail nick that open. But for left-handed use, especially with knives that have a half stop, like this particular Shadow Trapper, what I find happening is that if your nail is within the nick and it springs this half stop, you can see like it's a pretty, it snaps to the half stop. It tends to kind of twist your thumbnail in the nail nick, and I don't think that's particularly comfortable. So having the easy open, much more preferred. Here, like I said, same kind of finger positioning. It's where my ring finger would grip onto the knife if I'm holding it in kind of a hammer fist kind of grip. If I'm holding it more with my thumb on the spine like this, most of the pressure is being applied by my index and ring finger and thumb, kind of pinching this top portion there. So the easy open doesn't even get involved in this kind of holding grip to cut with. But I definitely reduced the size. I realized that I didn't need as much. Having the hole where the nail nick is actually kind of works. Nail nicks tend to be ground with a kind of a curve towards the left portion of this nail nick here, and the portion that's against the spine of the blade tends to be straight cut. And it's a much sharper angle there, and something for your thumbnail to kind of get a grip on. But the same is true with like the fleshy portion of your thumb. You can actually dig the fleshy portion of your thumb into that nail nick and get a much better grip on the knife versus, let's say you were smaller leverage arm here, but the grip that you get here is not, it's a much slicker surface for your fingers to grip onto. So I didn't center this hole here where the nail nick is exactly, because I felt like that would have been too far up the handle. But I do have enough of the nail nick exposed where my fingers can still grab onto half of that nail nick, get a grip on that's like catching into the flesh of my thumb and making the knife easier to open. I definitely encourage people to modify their knives, especially cheaper knives. You could have knives, they're from Case, that you can get for well under $100 or whatever it is. And, materials in slip joints tend not to be the most difficult to grind. Carbon fiber grinds incredibly easily, although make sure you do it in a very well ventilated area and wear proper PPE, because you don't want to be breathing in carbon fiber dust. Something like Delrin and liners, this is unlined completely. This is just pure lightning strike carbon fiber in the handle, which is why I love this knife so much. It's super lightweight, like under 2 ounces, for basically very similar, you get the similar cutting edge, but the Northwoods is significantly heavier, just because the handle construction is, ebony wood and with brass liners and some kind of nickel bolsters, I assume. But most of these materials very easy to grind. This is like Delrin or another type of plastic with stainless steel liners. You can see there that, as with most of my GECs, they tend to contact the back spring if you let them snap. So I just have a little bit of cordage in there to help protect the blade. And I also tend not to snap these back in place too much if I can avoid it. Delrin, brass, super easy to grind. Wood, pretty soft material, very easy to sand, and then also brass liners as well. With these types of material, you may want to decrease your speed of your rotary tool, just because once you get to a high enough speed, it tends to generate a lot of heat which leads more to melting plastics, than you are grinding them away. But I definitely encourage it. Super simple, like I said, I just basically use the 10-speed Dremel with sanding wheels. Sanding wheels are super cheap. You can get like 100 of these, not from Dremel, but from like a third party for a couple of dollars. This Dremel, like 10-speed, I think is the 3000 models, maybe $70. You can even get like a cheap one from Harbor Freight for 20-30 bucks. Start on a cheap knife. If you're not comfortable freehanding, when I did these, I basically just kind of freehanded it. So they may not be the best. What you could do is kind of vise up your Dremel tool so it's stationary, and then slowly use both hands to grind as much as you want against the Dremel wheel. Yeah, I look at this, I'm like, man, I've really, I really just took a giant chunk out of the handle that wasn't necessary. This Northwoods was my kind of first higher end slip joint. With being over $100 with 154 cm blades, and just really nice construction. Fit and finish is not perfect, but compared to a lot of cases, it's definitely made a lot nicer. And blade steel is definitely much nicer. So yeah, highly encourage you to modify your knives. Use them. I'm a big believer in users. I'm not a shelf queen person by any means. And you can see there's plenty of scratches and some tarnishing and everything on these knives. But when you do mods, don't just blindly go into them. Put some thought into them. Do a little research. I can't be the first person who has easy open knives in the past, and definitely won't be the last. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you guys got something informative out of it, and have a good one.